Here we are at our last speech of the semester, your persuasive speech. So this is an 8-minute speech. It is a research speech, one where you'll need to continue to do your oral citations. In fact, you'll have to cite 5 oral citations in this speech in order to get full credit. So again, please review the rubric so you can see what you'll be evaluated on. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit about the persuasive speech and how to take your informative speech and move it to your persuasive speech. So again, you're going to work with the same topic that you did in your informative speech. The difference is that in your informative speech, you were presenting other people's arguments. So you were presenting the those in favor and those against. And in the persuasive speech, you are going to pick one side and defend that speech. So you're going to take ownership over the arguments in a way that you did not in the informative speech. So if you remember, in the informative speech, you had 2 main points, right? Main point 1 was either for or against. So like, for example, we should ban single-use plastic. And the main point 2 would be we should not ban single-use plastic. So whichever side you are defending, that will become your thesis statement. So your thesis will be either we should ban the death penalty, we should not ban the death penalty, we should ban single-use plastic, we should not ban single-use plastic, we should allow animals to be kept in zoos and aquariums, we should not allow animals to be kept in zoos and aquariums, depending on what topic you have and ultimately what side you are taking. So that will be your thesis statement. Then you'll have 3 arguments, 3 main points. You can use the subpoints from that main point in your informative speech, but you're not bound to them. So if you want to change it up or maybe combine 2 and add a 3rd one, that's fine. You're still going to present the 3 best arguments for your side of the topic. So then the question becomes, how do you take half of a 6-minute speech and make an 8-minute speech? So I want to talk a little bit about how to add some depth and what will be different in the persuasive speech. So remember, the persuasive is a call to action. You're trying to get the audience to fall in line, to believe your side of the issue, and ultimately to do something about it. So in order for that to happen, you have to create an emotional connection with the audience. So the main way that you're going to add depth to your speech is by providing specific examples and narratives. So in the informative speech, most of you focused on data, on quantitative support for your claims, which is important because you do need to explain the scope of an issue. But in the persuasive speech, we want to focus on connecting with the audience, on making an emotional appeal, on getting folks to empathize with your side of the story or of the controversy. So as you've been doing your research, I hope that you have come across some of those stories, right? Some examples. So, for example, in the death penalty debate, one thing that comes up a lot is that we have potentially executed people who are innocent, or we have at least exonerated people from death row who are innocent. So you can tell us the scope of that concern, right? Like, maybe California has released, dozens of people from death row. But the way that we connect personally is for you to tell us an individual story, to talk about one person who was wrongly convicted so that we can empathize with that person and be moved emotionally. So those stories, those specific examples, the qualitative data is going to be an important part of your persuasive speech. So each main point needs to have both quantitative and qualitative data. And you may need to do some additional research on your side of the topic in order to find that information. But that's really the bulk of where the depth is going to come from. So you're going to share these 30-second to a minute long narratives, examples, things like that you're finding in your research. Okay. The second thing is, you can't act like we didn't listen to your informative speech. So you have to account for the arguments that the other side is making. So you don't have to do so systematically. So you don't have to, every time they have an argument, answer it specifically. But you need to address the arguments where they come in conflict with your arguments. So if you are arguing that something will save us money and the other side argues that it will cost more, you need to answer that. You need to account for that in your speech. So sometimes it's a difference of how we evaluate the data. So for example, again, in the death penalty debate, both sides claim that they are cheaper, that they save money. And that's because the people who are opposed to the death penalty, they include the cost of the trial when they evaluate how expensive the death penalty is. And those who are in favor of the death penalty, they look primarily at the cost of incarceration, how much it costs to keep someone in jail. So you got to explain that in your speech to explain why your side is correct. The other thing is that you don't have to say yes because they say no. So sometimes you can acknowledge that their argument is correct, but that your side outweighs. So for example, people who argue that we should not ban single-use plastic argue that we need single-use plastic in specific instances, like for example that folks with disabilities need access to straws in order to drink or to have self-reliance, the ability to do things on their own. You don't have to say that that's not true. You just have to account for that argument in your own claims. So you can say, yes, these folks do still need access to straws, but that's not a reason we should keep using single-use plastic. So we can find alternatives like paper straws or metal or reusable straws and focus on that. But you have to account for the argument when it comes in direct conflict with yours. So that's the other way that you're going to add depth to your speech. So the main points are going to be longer and more structured with more depth than they were when you presented them in the informative speech. So that's the main way that you're going to add to your persuasive speech, the depth of the time of your persuasive speech. Finally, the last thing that's different about your persuasive speech is you have to end, the very last thing, if you look at the outline template, is a call to action. So you can't give us all of this information, get us emotionally attached, make us want to do something on behalf of your concern, and then leave us. You have to give us something that we can do so that we can feel like we're participating in this movement that you have convinced us to join. So you need to tell us a specific and tangible step that we can take at the end of your speech to help move the policy forward. So there are a few ways that you can think about that. So the most obvious one that comes to most people's minds is voting, but you can't just tell us to vote. So for those of you who have a topic for which we may actually vote on, that would be an acceptable topic, but you can't just say vote. You have to explain how. In California, you have to register to vote. You have to do so ahead of the election. So you can't just show up on the day of the election to vote. How do we register to vote? How do we find our polling place? How should we actually vote? That's important, right? There are times when the way to vote is kind of confusing. So for example, in the last election, we had a ballot proposition on daylight savings time, and it was confusing because if you were in favor of daylight savings time, you were voting no. So you have to explain how we will actually vote on those issues. For a lot of you, your topics are not things that we're going to directly vote on, but things that require legislative action. So if it is a state position, something that the state of California is doing, you need to tell us how to figure out who our state representatives are. So how do I know who represents me in the legislature in California? If it's a federal policy, then that requires that my elected representative or my congressional representative, or my senator, or likely both, participate. So I need to know how to find out who those people are and how to contact them. So again, what do I tell them when I contact them so that they will help push your policy forward? The last thing, and really what most of you will end up doing because we aren't directly voting either through our congressional representatives or through propositions on these issues, is to connect us with organizations that are doing this work already. So you're not the first one to have this idea. You're not the only one who is advocating on behalf of this concern or this issue. So you need to put us in touch with folks who are doing that work. So you need to find an advocacy group, an organization. You need to tell us how to find them. You need to tell us what they need. It's money. It's always money. But hopefully there's some other things. Can we volunteer? Can we donate specific items? Can we share their information on social media? Can we sign a petition on change.org or something like that? And explain how they will help move the policy forward. So that's the last thing I want to emphasize, is that you have to give us something that moves the policy forward. So if you are talking about banning single-use plastic, it would be great if we all got reusable water bottles, and you can include that, but simply getting a reusable water bottle does not help us end the use of single-use plastic. So you need to explain something that gets us moving in the policy direction. How will we convince the actors who are in charge to change the policy level? So that's going to be a significant portion of your speech. I mean, you're talking about having a much longer conclusion for the persuasive speech than you did for the informative or the demonstration speech. So focus your attention on providing that depth. Don't just end by saying, now sign this petition, but explain what that organization is doing, what that petition will do, and how to get involved. That will be at least a minute of a good speech in terms of your call to action. So that should be your persuasive speech. I look forward to your advocacy, and if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out.